Welcome back, my rogues. Today's question is, what is the kindest thing you've done or seen? Hope you enjoy, and check me out on Instagram. My dad ran into an old high school friend he hadn't seen in years. He learned that the man had cancer, that he had no family except a son in college in another state, and that he was basically dealing with it all by himself. So my dad started taking him to his appointments and out to lunch. He even organized how to take his crazy number of prescriptions, since it was confusing to figure out when to take them when they all had different times and requirements. There were about 18 of them, I think he said. Then, when his friend died, my dad helped his son do all of the end-of-life arrangements. My dad is my hero. He is such a giving person, and I strive to be like him. I was 16, driving over to my girlfriend's house on rainy Saturday afternoon. There was a man biking in front of me, and when he went to get onto the sidewalk, he completely ate shit. I pulled into the closest driveway and saw that his bike was mangled and his arm was bleeding. I threw his bike in my trunk, gave him my old sweatshirt for his bloody arm, and drove him home. When I dropped him off, he gave me his card. Turned out he was a dentist at a local research hospital. Well, fast forward to when I'm 19 and the same man took out my wisdom teeth for free as part of a research experiment. Not sure if there was actually an experiment that they needed wisdom teeth for, but just goes to show that good things happen to good people. I worked at Starbucks. One morning around 6:30 a customer came in and I asked how she was doing. "Oh, it's already crazy and I haven't even started," she replied. To make her day go a little easier, I gave her coffee order for free. A few days later, I was having a terrible morning. 6:30 and already chaos. She came in, asked me how I was doing, and I said the above. A couple hours later, she came back with a gift bag for me. Inside was a nice bottle of wine. We'd both had bad mornings, and someone's small gesture had made the day just a little bit nicer. Something comes to mind that happened to me once. It was my first job in the field of conservation, and my boss was a real hard ass, but secretly a kind man. I had a 6-month-old son and was a 20-year-old single mum. I had just found out some bad news and was really sinking financially. My son's dad was dipping in and out. I wasn't emotionally mature enough for a relationship at the time. I had too much on my plate. One thing after another. I was the only woman on a crew of 7 men, working to plant trees, fix USFS roads and restore habitats in the PNW for 10 hours a day. Too girly to relate to the guys. Too manly for my girlfriends. Nobody understood. I felt hopeless. One day I cried on lunch break. It was all stacking up and I was cracking under pressure. After work the next day, as the other crew members filtered out of the work trucks, my boss said to me, "Just wait for a second." I was irritated because I thought he was going to ream me for my work performance, which he frequently did, for everyone. Instead, he waited until everyone was gone, pulled out his wallet and took a wad of cash out. He said, "I don't know how much is here, 'cause I just grabbed a handful, but I want you to take every dollar in my wallet and help get yourself out of that hole you're in." It's been almost a decade since then, and my life has been completely turned around. I'm deliriously happy now. That rough, sour old Forrester made a big change in my life, and for much more than that moment, I'll always appreciate having the opportunity to know and work for him. Background: my family and I were homeless when I was about to turn 13. My youngest brother is severely autistic. We were standing in line for lunch at the local soup kitchen, which opened at 11 a.m. We had arrived at 6 in the morning, and were decently close to the door, only about 20 other people in front of us. My father had just returned from taking my youngest brother for yet another walk around the block, as he had begun fighting and stimming, and biting himself in frustration. After another few minutes in line, it was clear that he had more than reached his tiny 9-year-old limit and had begun to lose it. There was a couple of guys who were dressed in ratty shirts, jean vests covered in patches, and plenty of veteran memorabilia, mostly from Vietnam. Think those little ribbons or the POWMI patches. Each of them had either an old, dirty backpack or a trash bag which held all of their personal belongings in the world. One of men, in a wheelchair and missing a leg. Seeing my little brother's frustration and hearing my mother explain yet again that he had severe autism, rolled up to the 5 of us, 2 parents and 3 young kids, all sunburnt from the Florida sun with no place to call home, and unhooked his one treasured possession. He had a little stuffed monkey that was hooked onto his steering portion of the wheelchair. It was the only clean thing about the man, or really anyone else in line. It had a little vest like his, a tiny jean jacket with a small pow patch on its back. He gave it to my little brother, and my little brother immediately hugged it and cuddled with it, calming down. I'll never forget his words. "He looks like he could use it more than me." It was his one and only real, treasured possession, and he gave it to the little boy that was crying. Now, I'm in a position to give back. And I do whenever I can if I have the opportunity. I help those who need it, but I don't think I could ever repay that single gesture, so I just try to live my life the best way I possibly can. I saw a neighbor boy practicing his jump shot into some tree branches in his front yard. I had a portable hoop in the back from when I moved in that was taking up space. So I walked over and offered him the hoop for free. I only lived there for the next year or two, but it was almost non-stop basketball dribble next door after that. I saw him, his sister, parents, aunts, uncles, even grandparent or two all take a couple shots of the hoop over time. It felt good to know his family got so much use out of it. I broke my foot while bouldering a week into my semester abroad. I had never been out of the country before, so I was absolutely panicking. A total stranger came right over after I fell, recorded important info for the paramedics, and spent the next 10 or so minutes while waiting for the ambulance asking me questions about my studies and my research ID. Mentioned I was a student. He asked such thoughtful questions and was so kind and able to calm me down even though I was absolutely freaking out. An older gentleman tried to ship an envelope to his grandson from a shipping company I worked at. The way he acted and the things he said threw up too many red flags in my head. So against company policy, I opened the envelope after he left and inside of it was 5 figures in cash. I called the cops and told him to get in touch with the man and try to figure out what was going on. As it turns out, someone had called the older man and said his grandson was in the hospital and if they didn't send the money he would get a surgery that was badly needed. The older man couldn't get in touch with the grandson by phone, so he panicked and sent the money to the address they provided. We were able to stop it from happening and get the money back to him. He said it was basically his life savings. The story kind of got big and the news ran a story on it, and apparently it's a scam that happens to a lot of old people. We started this kind of club to reach out to nursing homes and try and educate people about it. And a lot of people were not aware of anything like that happening. A lot of good came from me just being nosy. When I was enlisting into the army, my recruiter picked me out to go over some paperwork in his office, which was close to the downtown area of my city. On the way there we passed a homeless woman sitting on the side of the road. Without even a second thought, he whipped the car around, pulled through a nearby drive-thru, bought a huge meal with a large cup of water, and raced back to where the woman was sitting. The look on her face when he pulled up and handed her the meal through the window was something I will never forget. He didn't have to do something like that, but he did it out of the kindness of his heart. H is one of the best leaders I know, and I try to emulate him in everything I do. I was breaking down in the middle of the street and sitting on the sidewalk. A stranger girl came and patted on my shoulders, kept talking about random stuff, trying to make me laugh and calm, and she managed to do so. It was the most wholesome thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes when my sister is sleeping or napping, I plug her phone into charge, so when she wakes up, it'll be 100 edit OMG IDIDNT. Expect all this kindness, thank you, and stay safe. In 6th grade, it was 2 stops away from my stop. A man was just laying on the sidewalk. Our bus was stopped for a long time. I noticed the bus driver WASNT on the bus, and I looked outside and the guy was just laying there. Our bus driver is RLLY nice, so her being the nice lady she is, she rushes out of the bus, check his pulse and calls an ambulance. The bad part was some people on my bus were talking shite, saying I bet he overdosed on something. And almost after that my mum comes to pick me up. Turns out the next day our bus driver said the man from yesterday didn't overdose. He went into diabetic shock, or I think that's what she said, but she basically saved someone. I absolutely love doing adopt a families during Christmas. I don't have kids of my own, but I really put a lot of thought into what to get them. These are low-income families, and I always ask for ones with lots of little kids, so I try to pick things that they can get a lot of use out of. I always get loads of books, especially ones where the parents can interact with the kids. Cookbooks, puzzles, bedtime stories. I go heavy on science books, kids too, especially for girls. Always gotta get a hula. One of those huge life-size dollhouse castles you can color, and a ton of some sort of age-appropriate building blocks or Legos. I get piles of art stuff and paper, coloring books, painting sets, jewelry kits, all kinds of crafted things. I get them some sort of diary or journal if they're older. Someplace secret they can write their thoughts. My most favorite family of them all was single mum WHOD, just turned 18. Her son was 3 and she'd moved into her very first apartment. She had nothing but 2 bare mattresses on the floor, one for her and one for her son. She was working a job and was trying to save up for things for the house. Her wish list was heartbreaking. She wanted blankets for them both, a pan to cook with, and a Spider-Man toy for her son. That's it. I was single at the time, supporting myself, so I only had a couple hundred to spend. I got her a complete comforter sheet set, a pillow, and a full set of cooking pans. I found the coolest thing for her son though. It was a fitted sheet that turned your bed into a Spider-Man tent. It was awesome. And then I found a big Spider-Man stuffed toy, like 2 feet tall. I also found this huge book with over 100 full-length bedtime stories. I got the usual boring stuff, clothes for her son and a gift card for a holiday meal. But then I found it Target clearance TV-DVD combo. It was less than 100. I knew money was tight, so I included a note in her Christmas card that she could rent her son videos from the library for free. I would have given anything to see their faces. I really hope she liked everything. I wish that it made a good Christmas for her and maybe made her first Christmas on her own a little more happy. I reached out to dozens of people my dad has known and told me stories about throughout the years. Cousins, relatives, co-workers, groomsmen, friends throughout his adult years, friends from childhood, and even from his recently deceased dad before he passed away. I asked them if they could share a memory or picture they had of him. I was overwhelmed by the responses. So many people wrote back, even people I had missed but had heard about it through the grapevine. It was so kind of those people to dig through their archives and spend the time to do that. I compiled them all into a box and gave it to him for his 60th birthday. My dad and the rest of our family all really enjoyed reading the letters and seeing long-lost photographs. I donated stem cells to a stranger. I matched with him almost a year ago and the procedure was completed in December. It's a very impersonal experience because of the anonymity of it. I didn't know anything about the patient I was donating to and they knew nothing about me. It wasn't until I received a letter from her this morning no less that it really hit me how much of an impact it had on her life. For me it was a cheek swab I did in college 4 years ago and then a random email saying that I had matched with someone. It was eye-opening to read her letter because after the pandemic I hadn't really thought about for a while. Of course, it was a profound experience donating life-saving stem cells to someone, but not knowing where those cells were going after the procedure left me feeling sorta empty. It wasn't until today that I really appreciated it. Was at the gas station once, saw this woman at the pump next to me frantically scurrying through her person crying. Turns out she was on E, had no money and was trying to scrounge up change to get enough gas to get to a job interview. I asked her if she was okay and she explained the situation to me. I've been there myself before and it sucks. So I told her to fill up her tank. She looked at me bewildered and confused. I told her I'll cover it for her. She gave me the biggest hug and thanked me. I told her I've been there before and I know how it is, and that people should look out for one another. It felt good to brighten someone's bad day by offering a small amount of help. First of all, I was not simping, which is one of the stupidest, most immature terms in existence. I just have been in a similar situation myself and had enough empathy to help someone in need. No, she did not ask for help. She wasn't expecting help either. I'm a good person and believe people should back each other up and help one another, as I also believe in karma. Also, you know your fuel gauge, how it says E on one side and F on the other. Do I really have to explain that E is bad and means empty fuel tank? Edit. After having an ex-wife who has cheated on me and ruined me financially to the point where I was at rock bottom and having to rebuild my life from scratch, I know the struggle of trying to get back on your feet is like. I'm a good person and I don't like seeing people go through struggles like this. Ever since I got my life back together, I have donated to charities that are meant for this purpose. Things like food, clothes, etc. I even volunteer at local soup kitchens and food closets, because if I can make someone's struggles just a tiny bit easier, it is worth it to me. I always remember what goes around comes around. This past Christmas, I knew one of my co-workers, a single mum with 3 kids, recently divorced, and just moved back home from across the country, was worried about money and the upcoming holiday. I wanted to help but I didn't want to hurt her pride. I gave my closing manager $50 to give to her anonymously. It wasn't much. I couldn't spare a lot. I still don't know how she reacted or if she told anyone. She's a nice lady and works really hard. I had a great day. About 2 years ago, I stopped into a coffee shop, and an elderly couple sat across from me. He clearly was suffering from dementia, and her caring for him was very tender and affectionate. On my way out, I bought a gift card and gave it to her, telling her how touched and inspired I was, and that the next coffee was on me. Tears welled in her eyes. She was just so happy that someone actually noticed. Then I got on my motorcycle and stopped to gas up. Checked my lottery ticket, good for 20, but I didn't cash it. I'm off to the side of the parking lot, smoking a cigarette before I hit the road, when a police cruiser pulls up, lets a guy out of the back seat, and drives away. The guy approaches me, and says, "Sorry to bug you, dude, but I really need a smoke." I replied, "Never seen a guy get out of a cop car needing a smoke." That didn't need more than one. I gave him the remainder of my pack. About half full, down the road I go. And an hour or two later I stop for another coffee. Outside, again having a smoke before I continue. There's a young girl, and I nod and ask, "How's it going?" "Not good." Her and her BF had just been kicked out, and they were broke. I gave her what change I had, and apologized that it wasn't more, it was maybe 56. She thanked me profusely, and began to walk away. And that's when I remembered the lottery ticket. I gave it to her and she broke into tears. Now they could eat for a day or two. Room, down the road. I am visiting a friend, and she's delayed, so I decide to kill some time at you got it, a coffee shop. They have a patio, and there's a fella there that looked about 90 years old. I said hello, and before you know it, we're involved in a conversation. Great guy, a WW2 pilot, bush pilot, businessman. His wife had died earlier that year, and he just wanted to get out of the retirement home for a change of scenery on a nice, sunny day. He had some terrific stories to tell. The time flew past. That was a hell of a day. It just seemed like every time I turned around, I was able to make a small contribution toward brightening another person's day. The stars really lined up, and I will never forget that day. My husband and I adopted a Great Dane and named him Paxton, who quickly became our first child. Pax went everywhere with us, including family holidays like Christmas and vacations. Pax was more human than a lot of humans I've met. He would actually hug me when I was down, loved everyone, even cats, and slept with his stuffed frog for years. Paxton passed away suddenly last year of a heart attack. We came home to find him in the floor of the living room. My husband and I were devastated. We can't have kids and Pax was our baby. In the 18 months before Pax died I lost my mum, my grandmother, and uncle. I think something in me broke. I couldn't function. I took a week off work. When I returned, my office had gotten I had an envelope on my desk. It was a thank you card from the local animal shelter. My co-worker had donated $150 to them in Paxton's name. I was floored. I knew he was a dog and didn't expect anyone else to get it. That one gesture was so kind and needed. She will never know how much they meant to us. I was at an arcade one time and I saw this kid play a claw machine. The kid was trying to get a Batman plush and failed to win it. Once the kid left, I gave it a try and I managed to win the Batman plush. I found the kid who wanted to win the Batman plush and I gave him the Batman plush. He was so happy to have it and it made me feel good that I made someone's day. It was Christmas. I was out in a bar, naturally a little tipsy, went to the bathroom, and saw a woman there wiping drunk people's hands. She looked miserable, obviously hated her job but had no choice. I went to the bathroom, came out and refused her service. I could dry my own hands just fine. Handed her 20 and said Merry Christmas. She jumped to her feet, hugged me with tears in her eyes, said thank you, thank you, thank you, over and over. I didn't think 20 could have that effect on someone. That's when I realized how easy it is to make someone happy if you would just try a little. Just finished college to be a teacher, but until August working at a doctor's office. We've had a ton of our much older patients calling cancelling their appointments due to COVID-19. Had an older couple in their 90s call because their medication ran out. didn't have a way to get their refill, so I went and picked it up for them. Drove to their house to put it in their mailbox, and they thanked me a lot after. Didn't even think twice about doing it. An older couple needed help and I had the ability to do it. Just have to treat everyone how you'd like to be treated. In trying to put my tiny toddler to bed, we were in total silence for 40 minutes. I thought she was sleeping, but when I coughed, she broke the silence and said, "Bless you, you okay?" To me I saw this as super kind. She wanted to know if I was okay. She's only one. This happened like a week before school got cancelled because of Ms. Rona. So we're after school one day. I was supposed to have practice, but it got unexpectedly cancelled, and nobody told me until it was too late. My school days ended at 310, and buses left at 320. It was like 318, so I scrambled to grab my shit and find my bus. Now, my bus kept on having substitute drivers and whatnot, so it was hard to find because they never parked in the right spot. I couldn't find my bus, and all of the buses started leaving. Now, I could have just walked home because I live a little less than a mile away from my school. But it was raining and I had a ton of shit with me to bring home. My old bus driver who drove for another bus saw me stranded and crying in a dramatic "Kid, I'm sorry." So she pulled over and lingered for me to hop on, with a bus full of kids waiting to go home. For a kid who doesn't even go on her bus anymore, I was so happy. She told me not to worry about it and I got new baby. That is one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me. I got to go home nice and dry, and most of all, happy. I was at a store and there was a woman with two very small kids checking out. She had a bunch of groceries and a couple of toys for the kids. She went to pay and discovered she didn't have her wallet, so she told the cashier that she would put everything back. Her little girl, who was only about 2, started to cry. The gentleman in front of me, who looked like he could have been a homeless guy, went up to the cashier and told her he was going to pay for everything. When the lady protested, he said, "I don't want your little girl to cry. This is my good deed for the day." I almost cried, as did the lady who was trying to buy her groceries. Also, it taught me not to judge a book by its cover. The gentleman, who I at first deemed to be a down-and-outer wasn't, got into a very nice car. My high school government class was graded on a curve, and I was killing it. I was way ahead of everyone else. But I wasn't planning on going to college, and the next best had a scholarship riding on her GPA. So I deliberately skipped the final exam. When the teacher told me he couldn't give me the top slot, I asked him to give it to her, and explained why. He never looked at me the same after that. We both knew I had the material nailed. The final exam would have only proven the already obvious. She needed the grade, and it would have meant nothing to me. She went to college and eventually became a vice president of a regional bank. I'm happy for her. I've been buying groceries for 35 households a week for the last month. Most of these people I've never met in person. I just drop the stuff off at the front door and then leave. Years and years ago, I saw a former co-worker at the rec center. She'd just started working there. We got to talking, and she mentioned that she had no groceries and no money until her first payday in a couple weeks. When her shift ended, I drove her to the grocery store. I told her to buy whatever she wanted. I paid for her groceries, then took her to Chipotle afterwards so I could buy her lunch and break at 10 so she'd have bus fare available for the rainy days coming up. Defense contract manufacturing. When I worked in that field, it was like a time capsule to 70s. Stereotypes: beer for lunch, whiskey in the desk drawer, everyone fucking everyone, and the best seats at the biggest games for decision makers. Last August, I loaded some camping gear onto the back of my bicycle and left my home in Wisconsin with the goal of riding to Seattle and down the Pacific coast. I spent about 6 months on the road. Along the way, every single person I met wanted to help me in whatever way they were able. Whether it was a driver who saw me stopped on the side of the road in the night of nowhere, Wyoming, and pulled over simply to offer me an extra bottle of water, or the people who welcomed me into their home for a night, providing me with a warm bed, hot shower, and their wonderful company over a delicious dinner. Everybody wanted to be a positive part of my story. As for the kindest thing I've ever done, the first that comes to mind was from back in high school. My school used the city buses as school buses, and because I lived a block from a bus stop on a route that also went right past the school, my bus just followed that exact route. It also ran just a couple minutes behind a regularly scheduled city bus for the same route. As a result, it wasn't uncommon to see adults commuting to work on the school bus. I also got on early enough that I could always find a seat. But just a few stops later, the seats would often be full and new passengers would have to stand. There was a woman who sometimes got on the bus a short while after me with her young child, like just starting to string together basic 2 or 3 word sentences, and shouting she could walk pretty well. Mum often carried her, on a couple of occasions when all the seats were already full. I'd notice other students offer the woman their seat, and she would always politely decline. But when a seat was available, she'd always take it, so I started always sitting near the front of the bus. On those days that I saw the woman waiting for the school bus instead of the regular bus, and when all the seats were already full, I'd stand up right before she boarded the bus and find somewhere to stand for the rest of my ride. And the woman would always take my empty seat. On a couple of occasions, when there were still other empty seats when we got to her stop, she and I would chat a little bit. She was really nice, and her daughter was very friendly and absolutely adorable. I kept doing that for the last several months of my senior year. But I never told her what I was up to, and as far as I know, none of the other regular passengers who saw me do it ever told her either. I was shopping in BJ's, like Costco, Sam's Club for those who don't have it, and as I came around an aisle, I saw an older woman who, from the back, looked exactly like my mum, who passed from breast cancer a few years ago. She looked so much like her I took a picture and sent it to my GF and brother. It was uncanny. As I walked by her she turned around and I saw she had a bedazzled pink hat on that said Survivor, with a pink ribbon. My mum would have worn something exactly like that. I told her I liked her hat and she explained she survived breast cancer once but it had come back. I told her that the same thing happened to my mum and unfortunately she passed after the second bout. After we talked a few minutes I went to the checkout line and talked to a manager about giving them my debit card number to pay for the woman's groceries when she went to checkout. The manager said they couldn't do that if I wasn't there, so I had to hang out while the woman finished shopping until I could get in line behind her. Coincidentally, I helped her put her things up to get scanned and asked if I could please pay for her groceries. because she reminded me so much of my mum. I really felt great doing it because I know if someone did that for my mum she would have never forgotten it. One of the smartest people I ever met married one of my good friends from high school. She had dabbled in coding games for fun but had no IT experience. She was working minimum wage at a sandwich shop. I was a manager at an IT consulting firm. I knew if given the chance to work in IT as a developer she would do great. So I pushed my company to hire her as an intern. Without any code camp, relevant college classes, or experience, I was told our company could never hire her. I helped her start small user group, put together a resume, and prep for an interview. Then I went back to my company and forced the issue. I had to use a number of favors just to get her an interview. Then I basically cashed in all my political capital, and said if she wasn't successful I would be accountable for it. They gave her a chance. And she kicked it just as I knew she would. That was 5 years ago. Today she is a Java developer making over $80K a year with full benefits. She loves her job, and my good friend doesn't work much because his wife makes so much money. Pushing so hard made a few people mad and it was a contributing factor to the company letting me go. A year later, I found a new job so it worked out for me. I don't think she realizes what it cost me to get her in. And it's probably better that way. But knowing I gave her a chance to change the trajectory of her life makes me smile. I was waiting for my mum at a shop when I saw an elderly man drop some money. I didn't know who he was, so I said, "Hey sir, you dropped some money." He smiled and thanked me. He picked it up and before he left he came over to me and gave me a $2 coin and said thanks again and left. I didn't expect that. I just did what was right and somehow got rewarded. I hope that elderly guy is okay during this COVID-19 situation. When I was a teen mother feeling judged by the church, one of the older ladies gave me a present that was a beautiful scented soap to use for my first postpartum post-birth shower. It was so small, yet an act of kindness I still remember nearly 30 years ago. I've given a lot of women nicely scented products since. I wish I told her at the time what it meant to me. I still adore products with the same scent, and the shower I took with that soap still stands out as one of the best I've ever had. Save a life risking mine. Short version: I was in Mexico and I was 14 years old. A woman in a corner talking on a phone. It was sunset and I spot a loud car. These are common, they're driving off-road. I grabbed the woman behind me and she screamed scared. The car stopped across one street. She thanked me. She wanted to give me money but I rejected. Then she told me to leave and she would take care of the situation. I was talking to some random guy in the bar, and he said he was having surgery the next day and didn't have someone to pick him up after. I ended up driving him there, sitting with him before he went back, calling his parents when he got out, sitting with him in recovery, picking up his post-op meds, driving him home, and making sure he was okay before I left. Never saw him again, and that's okay. When I was 15, I was a typical British teenage guy, wearing designer clothes, latest iPhone and all that stuff. Bit of a backstory: in the UK many kids don't have respect for their elders and wouldn't think to give up a seat or even acknowledge them, but I learned from a young age to respect everyone and help someone in need. So the bus stopped, and on got a group of boys and girls about the same age as me. But what they didn't see was the struggling old lady they refused to help onto the bus. She must have been about 8,090 and used a Zimmer frame. As she moved past, I stood up and offered her my seat as I thought it was the best thing to do. She smiled, sat down and began to talk to me. She spoke with a thick Slavic accent. Think she was Polish or Russian, but I could make out that she had never experienced someone my age help her in that way, and how disappointed she was when the other group of teenagers ignored her. I sat down next and continued to talk to her for the remainder of her journey. As she stood up to get off the bus, I noticed she was struggling to navigate down the aisle. I stood up and walked her gently down the bus and helped her off. We was now at a large bus station and I was getting back on to continue my journey to the next town. But I noticed that nearly everyone was getting off as well, and unexpectedly people began to thank me for what I did as they walked past even as I got on. I was approached by groups of people saying the woman was telling everyone about me and how happy I made her, even stating that she didn't think people who dressed like me would help her, probably because I was too mainstream back then. I felt a bit like a celebrity on that bus ride home because everyone wanted to talk to me. It doesn't matter how popular you're trying to be, who you're with or who you're nearby, you should always treat people with respect. I mentioned on another thread how I'd love to have a Super Nintendo to comfort play Super Mario on, because it reminds me of the good old days with my bro. And some random lovely stranger replied and said she'd give me hers. It's in the mail. Made me so happy that someone was so randomly kind. This one time at Starbucks a guy forgot to put his car in park. I jumped behind it and stopped it with my hands before it rolled out into the parking lot to hit the other cars. One time at an intersection there was a car on fire. I safely parked my car and walked into the intersection to direct traffic. I was a safe distance away from the car though. Was at the mall with my mum and stepdad about 20 years ago. Stepdad needed to use the bathroom and so we waited. He comes out holding a bank envelope, like the fabric kind that a store would use to deposit money into the bank. He found almost $12K. He got the deposit slip and found the store and returned it. Honestly, that man is amazing and I wish I was like him.
Hope you liked this video. Stay frosty my rebels.